All right, so now let's go through some of the exciting calculations that I've been using. First off, just to orient you to this spreadsheet, this stuff over here is just scaling the physical world size things to a 3D printed model that I made, as well as my reference drawing. So you can ignore everything over here. On this side, the orange is all inputs. So these are my design parameters. How big are the sails? Where are they positioned? Things like that. And then light green are kind of intermediate calculations. You don't really need to pay attention to those. And then the dark green one are really the outputs. These are the design criteria that we would use to compare this boat to other boats. I've got 3 different versions of this. So I have the original boat itself, just kind of a stock Buccaneer, the size sails that it has and where they are and all that stuff. Refitting it with the existing sails that I have. So if I was going to do this as cheaply as possible, I'll just use the existing sails that I have and I'll design everything around that. And then finally, if I was going to take full advantage of just designing this from the ground up, what's the maximum amount of performance I could get out of this? So starting off in the original, we've got a jib. The attachment point on the hull is about 1 foot back from the bow, and pretty much everything that I'm measuring, at least in the X direction, is distance from the bow. The jib is 16.25 feet by 8 feet. That has a height to, or I guess a width to height ratio of about 50%. The mast on this boat's 23 feet, 23.25 feet, and it's a little more than 7 feet back, a little bit less than halfway back from the bow. That mainsail is 20.33 feet, and it's 8.5 feet across the bottom, so that's a 42% length to height ratio. Interesting thing that I've learned about the sailboat design is just how much space you need for where the mast attaches to the deck, and the space to where the foot of the sail is, and then all the way up to the top. So we have a sail that's fully 3 feet shorter than the height of our mast. There's no mizzen on the stock boat, so there's nothing to show there. I'm putting the center lateral resistance at 9 feet, squarely in the middle of the boat. It's pretty close, and it's good enough for my calculations. These are some of the just kind of standard things. You can get this off Sailboat data. So the Buccaneer 18, it's 18 feet overall. It's got a 16.7 foot length at the waterline. And by my calculations, I've got 173 square feet of sail area. It's 175 is what's advertised. This is close enough for what I'm trying to do for my calculations. 6 foot beam, 500-pound boat, and it's almost 4 foot deep draft, and that's just from the center board. So none of those things really change. I should actually change this back to 500. But in the version of the boat where I increase if I were to increase the amount of freeboard, that's probably going to add some weight. Plus, I've got water ballast. Actually, I will put this back. That's what the water ballast is, what this represents. So the boat would be a little bit heavier if I have water ballast versus if I don't. This little leech sail denominator. So when you're calculating the sail area, typically you're going to do length times height divided by 2. That's the area of a triangle. But because these sails have leeches and they have a bit of a belly to them, they're a little bit bigger than just a actual square triangle. So typically between like 1.7 and 1.8 are the fudge factors that we use to get to good enough. Because I'm using really simple calculations. I don't want to go through the much more advanced math. So I just use a smaller denominator, and that gives me a little bit more sail area, which then affects the rest of the calculations. Here are my intermediates. I'm just calculating the area and the percentage of impact of that area to the overall sail area. So for the Buccaneer, the jib is about 75 square feet. The main's about 100 square feet. The jib contributes about 40% of the sail area, and the main contributes about 60% of the sail area, which means that our center of effort is going to move backwards towards the main because the main contributes more of that sail area. And it's just a proportion in the calculation. running through all of the math, I calculate that the geometric center of effort for those two sails is about 7.9 feet back from the bow. And that's about 1.1 feet or 1 foot in front of the center of lateral resistance. Remember, our center of lateral resistance here is at 9 feet, and we're calculating our center of effort at about 8 feet. So our center of effort's a little bit in front of our center of lateral resistance. And in this configuration, when this number is negative and fairly small, then we have that typical design where between 0 and 15% of the overall length of the boat, that the center of effort leads the center of lateral resistance, and that creates that more balanced feel. So that as you're actually underway, when you're in wind, in moderate wind, you're going to have a very balanced helm, and in very heavy wind, you'll have that weather helm, which will cause the boat to tend to round up into the wind. Now, if you want to heel over really far and really pick up as much speed as you can, you're going to have to fight that by applying more pressure and more angle to the rudder so that you're fighting against that rounding up. And then if you actually cared about maximum speed and squeezing every little bit of speed out, you'd kind of want to tune that. So in your ideal case, you would never use the rudder, and then you would never add additional drag to the boat, so you'd actually go faster. It's an impossible design goal for every situation, but that's kind of what you're trying to. It's at least one of your trade-offs, right? All designs are just a bunch of trade-offs. So I added a couple of other just kind of how does the boat feel metrics into here. So the displacement to length ratio, this helps us understand how, actually I don't remember what it makes us, I don't remember. I'll look that up and I'll come back to it. But the Buccaneer out of the box has a 48 displacement to length ratio. And you have to quantify these a little bit, and that this is a dinghy, and these will be a little bit different than it would be for like a blue water cruiser or some sort of much, much bigger boat that's much, much heavier. The sail area to displacement ratio, this tends to be a metric that helps you understand the performance of the boat. So pretty much the bigger the number is going to be, the more performant the boat's going to be, but that also means it's more likely to capsize. And at 44, this is very, very much into that high performance racing dinghy kind of area. So that's a quick assessment of the Buccaneer out of the box. One of the nice things is that most of my calculations very closely match the advertised values for this boat. So that gives me a little bit of confidence that my math is correct, that across multiple metrics, I'm getting similar values to what is advertised out there on the internet about this boat. So if I was going to refit it with the existing sails that I have, in both cases for the refit of the cat ketch, I'm going to presume that I have no jib. One of the nice things is that I have the option to add, I can add a bowsprit and I can add in a jib at a later time. And that, especially if I feel like I need to pull the center of effort a little bit more forward, I can easily do that just by adding a jib. But for the purposes of my design, I'm going to assume that I'm not using a jib. In most cases, I'll just be using the two sails. So in this case, I'm going to use a forward mast, the main mast of being 17 feet, and I'm going to place it 1.5 feet from the bow. That's a little bit behind where the jib attaches today. So it's about 6 inches back from where the jib attaches. The sail that I would put on the front, the one that I have, it's 15.2 by 7.4 feet, and that's a 49% ratio. So it's getting a little bit more square, or at least it's a longer foot than I see on the stock Buccaneer sail, but not out of spec or like out of what I've seen on other boats. I'd place the mizzen about 15 feet back. It sounds really far back to me. It's just a little bit forward of where the tiller ends, and it is in a very comfortable place in the cockpit where you have about maybe a third of the cockpit behind the mizzen and 2/3 of the cockpit in front of it. So it creates a lot of usable space. The Buccaneer has a huge cockpit. It's one of the nicest things about it. And this retains a lot of that space because we'll have to put a thwart across the boat to help support that mizzen, and that makes it a little harder to move around inside the boat. That sail, I said before that, that it was just the jib off of the Buccaneer. That's not entirely true. I'm actually going to cut it down a little bit and make it a little bit shorter just to fit this mast. But I'm going to cut it down to 13.25 by 6.5 feet. Center of ladder resistance stays the same. The main thing that we see here is that the sail area really drops off. So we go from 175 square feet in the racing version of the Buccaneer down to 110 square feet in this kind of prototype version, or lightly sailed version of it. We'll see down below that actually should be fine according to the numbers, but it is a pretty big drop, and that's one of the things where I'm not entirely certain that this boat will perform that well in light wind. So I'd be curious to see. I'm going to increase the displacement by 250 pounds. That's probably a little optimistic. I probably won't put that much water weight into it, but that's just what I'm using for modeling. That moves our center of effort back from 8 feet to 8.8 feet. So this would theoretically create a very neutral helm where the center of effort and the center of ladder resistance are pretty much right on top of each other. I am using simple triangles for the calculations of the sails. That's not really how they're actually shaped, and it's not exactly how they'll be configured on the boat. So this is there's a little bit of slop in this number, and I'm not entirely certain how this would really work out. But again, that's where real world testing comes in, right? We'll see that our displacement to length ratio increases from 50 up to 72. And again, I wish I remembered what that metric was telling me. But largely, this is just going to make the boat more comfortable. It's basically, it's less performant, I believe. With a sail area to displacement ratio dropping from 44 down to 21-ish, what that really means is the boat is still considered to be performant. It's still considered to be in that higher performance class. It's moving down more into that cruiser, day sailor kind of range. So the boat won't be quite as overpowered, won't go nearly as fast, but it also won't be as likely to capsize or as difficult to handle in high winds or when gusts come in. So that's pretty favorable to me. And at 21.4, this boat should still perform perfectly well as just a little day sailor to cruise around and have fun with friends. What I think is interesting, though, is if I actually refit it to the max sail area, this means I'd have to go out and buy sails, so it's going to cost real money. But I get a lot better performance out of it. So here I've just bumped that front mast up to 18 feet, and I would increase the size of the height of the mainsail to 16.8 feet and the foot to 9.3 feet, really cranking up the ratio there to 55%. But again, it doesn't look unreasonable, and I think that's a reasonable thing to do. Maybe, I don't know, maybe a boat builder will tell me why that's a terrible idea. And if you know why it's a bad idea, please comment below. I would love to know. The mizzen, I would bump up just a little bit, add 1/4 foot to it, because what that lets me do is increase the height of that sail to 14 feet. One of the things I calculated is I need a little over a foot, about 1.2 feet of space to account for slop loss at the very top of the mast where the sail hooks into the block, and for how much I want it to stand off of the deck. So I can increase the height, the p-value of that sail to 14 feet, and I'd keep the foot of it at 6.5 feet. That increases my sail area from 110 square feet up to 140 square feet. Now one of the boats that I've looked at a lot is called the River of Grass, I think. That has 150 square feet of sail area. It's only 15 feet long, so it's a lot smaller than this boat, but it has a similar sail area. And I think getting up to 140, we're getting a lot closer to that 175, which I know is more sail area than I want in the first place. So I feel really good about that. I think that this boat would perform just fine. keeping the weight at that same 750. It's probably a little bit less than that. Here, this moves my center of effort a little tiny bit forward to 8.5 feet back from the bow, which only gives me a half a foot between the center of lateral resistance and the center of effort. Still has that center of effort leading center of lateral resistance by a tiny bit, which means that in very, very light wind or in no wind, the boat's going to tend to fall off into a broad reach where you can pick up speed and then you can turn off into the course that you want. So that seems pretty good. And then as you get moving along faster and faster in a gust or in heavier winds, that center of lateral resistance will move in front of the center of effort and the boat will tend to round up into the wind when it gets overpowered. So it still meets all of my design criteria fairly well. The displacement to length ratio here stays at 72. I looked it up while I was talking, and basically like anything under 90 is considered an ultralight boat, and that's fine. So all of these are considered ultralight, but we're getting a little bit closer to the edge. So that probably means the boat's a little bit heavier, it's a little bit slower, it's a little bit easier to manage, which if you're not racing is just what you want if you're just kind of a lazy raid sailor. Here our sail area to displacement ratio bumps up to 27 or so, up from 21. So a little bit more performance, a little bit faster boat. So all this looks really good to me. On paper, I feel great about this design. Now I really just have to figure out, do I want to add that extra freeboard, learn a little bit more about the y-axis and how that impacts things, and do some more testing to see if this boat's really going to work, but really probably build it over the winter. So if I continue on with this project, I'll keep making videos, and I hope both of you enjoy it. Thanks.